It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, by George, I think he's got it. Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome back in to another podcast by George. Well, it's been a hard winter for a lot of folks. We've had a lot of harsh winter-like weather, but nothing like what they're enduring down in the Lone Star State, down in Texas. And we've got a special guest on the podcast by George live line. It's Michelle Hauser. She's an Austin psychiatrist, and she's also part of the thriving artist community down there in Austin that I love so much. And she's friends of Ann and Desharm Jones. You've heard their music on the podcast in the past, and that's kind of my 6 degrees or less of separation, my connection to Michelle. And just want to start off, I guess, by welcoming Michelle to a podcast by George.
Thank you so much. I was just really excited to get the message from Ann Desharm Jones asking if I could tell y'all about my experiences during the freak snowstorm we've had here.
Well, there's been a lot of coverage on this, but what I want to do is kind of get personal with it, because there are, it's like the Naked City used to say, there's so many millions of stories, but everyone's unique. Everybody's got their own situation. So kind of take us back here as to when this began and how you first, I guess, probably plunged into darkness. Was that in the water going off? How did it all come about for you?
Well, last week, and of course I remember when it was, because I was doing a medical service like Zoom that was on the computer with my patients, and it was Thursday afternoon and the electricity went out. So I lost all power and had to scramble to see patients over my phone. There's a medical video there, Doxy, which I continued seeing folks on. And then all day Friday, I was without power, and it came back on Friday at night. And I was one of the lucky ones that I had power Saturday and Sunday. Little did I know that Sunday would be my last shower for a week. But Monday afternoon, I had the power went out about 3 o'clock. And it was very interesting because my mother had called in the morning about lunchtime and said her power had been out since 1 in the morning. And my mother's 86, and she and her little dog live in a condo a couple of miles away. So I was racking my brain to find a way to get her over here because I still had power at that time. And, we had a big snowstorm for us, maybe 4 to 6 inches of snow. And I'm sure for you there, it's nothing, but we don't have snow plows. We don't have, people don't have chains or snow tires or things like that here. A friend of mine said, well, why didn't you just get a generator? Amazon delivered me one in one day. But of course, she's in Washington, D.C. And I said, you don't understand. Nobody can get here. The streets are completely blocked. And so I found somebody in the neighborhood that had a 4x4 truck. I posted on our little neighborhood email and said, can anybody go pick up my mom? This wonderful man in my neighborhood, Mike, drove over there, picked up my mom and her dog, brought her here, and within 2 hours, my power was out. So I'm not sure if she's bad luck or what, but the whole neighborhood's power went out about that time. Fortunately, I'm one of the lucky ones there. I have a gas fireplace, so I was able to turn that on to keep us warm for the whole week. Otherwise, we had nothing. That's not true. We still had water at that time. Some people, their water had already gone out also. And so it was a bunch of checking back and forth with friends and neighbors. Do you have power? Do you have water? Do you have water? Do you have power? Going back and forth, trying to find out who had what and were they okay.
Well, when you don't have water, being an old farm boy, I can tell you that's when times really get tough, because when you can't use your bathroom, then things get uninhabitable very quickly. So I kind of understand the cadence there with electricity, water, sewer, all of those types of things. And then eventually people down in Austin were struggling just to find food and drinkable water. And that situation you talked about, a lot of people don't even realize they're doing it, but they say, why don't you just get a generator? Well, what folks don't realize realize is that it snows down there. I mean, Austin's had snow before, but nobody was really prepared for this type of a devastating circumstance with really cold weather and a lot of snow. I've got some photos. I'm going to put one up here. A friend of mine took just outside his development. And these are the streets that Michelle is talking about. And people in our part of the country don't even realize what it's like not to have snow removal. But, 100 years ago, or maybe less in this part of the country, that's what it looked like up here, too. I mean, the ice and the snow just builds up and you can't go anywhere. The roads become impassable. And that's what they were dealing with down there. And folks, we're in a pandemic. I'm a lefty political type, Michelle, and I tell people all the time that before the pandemic, 80% of Americans were living a paycheck to paycheck. 63% of Americans couldn't afford a $500 emergency. Now, that's before the pandemic. So when they say, well, why don't you just go out and get a four-wheel drive truck? Why don't you just go out and get a generator? Why don't you? Well, it's just not possible for some people. So I guess the other thing about this is the preparedness thing. They say individuals should have been more prepared. But of course, the city, the county, the state governments weren't prepared for this either. And I was in the Northeastern blackout, the great blackout back in the early part of this century. God, it didn't seem like that long ago. But things get weird when you lose faith in your government and their ability to cope, and they can't tell you how bad it's going to get and when the services are going to come back. Was that a concern that you had down there as well?
Definitely. I've lived in Austin probably 33 years, having grown up in Houston and Galveston. And as you said before, we don't get this kind of weather. I believe the last two major times were 1989 and in 1962, I believe, where it ever got that cold here. So we weren't prepared for it. In fact, when they said there was a storm coming, I had planned to go visit a friend in Florida that week. And my mom called and said, well, maybe you better stay here and not have a house sitter, a college student at your house. And I thought, I guess so. Maybe that's a good idea, because we weren't prepared. Every day, the neighborhood group, we were on our phones, emailing each other and texting each other. Do you have this? Do you have that? Fortunately, since my parents grew up in Galveston part of the time, they were used to hurricanes.
Sure.
So I was used to having a pantry full of food. So I just thought that's what everybody had. And so I had plenty of food in my pantry. But in terms of thinking about water, in terms of thinking about things like that, we hadn't prepared because I think nobody had thought that it was going to be this severe and this tremendous. In fact, I was on one of my Facebook group threads the other day, and everybody was posting, what do you want to have in the future going forward? What kind of things do you want to have on hand? And everybody was making suggestions for future incidents, since this is supposed to be our world of the future, is getting more weather like this. And so daily, we were wondering why our neighborhood had not gotten power back and some of the surrounding ones had. We live in a nice area of town. Why wasn't our power back? But power was back. It was very spotty. And we were one of the lucky 8%, our little neighborhood was, that hadn't gotten power. And what we kind of figured out over multiple voicemails and calls to Austin Energy and so forth is that the storm that was actually last Thursday and Friday before, when it had rained, had knocked down tree limbs. And there was not enough vegetation that had been removed in advance. So by the time we had the power outage, we had to wait until there were enough trucks that could go and clear the vegetation off the lines so that our lines could be freed up to bring us power. And that was not until Friday night. So Friday afternoon. So my shower yesterday was the first one in 7 days, and it was great.
I can imagine. Well, living down there, were you aware of the vulnerability of your grid? There's been some reporting that people in government should have known that this type of thing could happen, that they were vulnerable. But I got a feeling that people like you and the population of Texas and the city of Austin certainly had no idea that you were that the grid that this could happen.
The group of friends that I have, none of us had a clue about this. I think if you're in politics or you're in energy, you may have known, but none of us had heard the word ERCOT. We had no clue what that was. We didn't know that our energy split off from the main part of the United States in the 1930s, and that this group of, this board managed electricity from different producers and cities, and then divvied it out without much forethought as to what this storm could be and what the power loss could be. I think we had a warning last Thursday, Friday, this is a week before the storm, that we may have some power outages. Well, that didn't get us prepared at all, some power outages. And then the next statement over the next couple of days is you may have rolling blackouts. I know a few people in town that had rolling blackouts, but most people had a complete blackout for days.
Well, and of course, it goes back to what I'm always talking about. It's what I want my government to do. I want us to keep us safe, keep us well, give us health care, keep us alive, for God's sake. And instead, our government and a lot of people in this country believe that its role is to, run around the world and bomb the hell out of people to keep us safe and well. And I'm reminded in 2017 of those Moab, M-O-A-B bombs they dropped in Afghanistan. Those things cost $16 million apiece. They dropped them over there, killed a couple of dozen of suspected terrorists. They did the math on it. It cost $450,000 each to kill those members of ISIS over there in Afghanistan. That was back in 2017. So I guess what I'm trying to say is our government should be working more proactively to prepare us for climate crisis, as an example, and these types of catastrophes that have visited the state of Texas and the city of Austin. And we need to get our nose out of these never-ending wars and spend our money at home on our infrastructure and keeping people healthy and alive in these circumstances. Well, you've survived, obviously, Michelle. I mean, you've made it through. You had your gas fireplace. Tell us now about coming back to normal. Is it happening quickly, or is this going to be a slow process for you and your community?
Well, for our part of town, it's happening quickly. I know it's been difficult this week. I've talked to some physician friends of mine. Hospitals ran out of water and ran out of power. They were transferring people from one hospital to the other. And so that's getting back to normal. But there were hospitals being closed and transferring patients across town in the middle of the snow and ice. So it was quite difficult for the whole city. There were emergency services where ambulances couldn't get through. And so until the snow melted, we were in a major crisis, and the city hadn't prepared for that. You're correct. And unfortunately, the members of the ERCOT board, none of them apparently live in Texas, and they're all quite wealthy. And so this wasn't a problem for them, like the little people on the ground that we might be. And I'm sure you are aware of our senator going on vacation to Cancun.
Ted Cruz, folks, that's who she's talking about. Yeah, talk about optics. Holy cow, he just picks up and goes to Cancun. That's a fact.
But we did it was very nice to see Beto O'Rourke, rolling up his shirt sleeves and helping with providing supplies to people. Actually, Andrea Ocasio-Cortez flew to Houston and was helping organize supplies of water handouts to people. Because once the water went off in so many households, people had nothing. And fortunately, services here in terms of companies donating money and donating supplies have been wonderful. Our famous HEB store, grocery store, is up and ready for every catastrophe. And apparently they let people just walk out of the store with groceries when their lights went out.
I saw that.
So we're lucky to have that. Now the snow began to melt yesterday. Snow and ice began to melt, and so the roads are actually clear, and we can drive now to stores. A lot of the stores have been picked clean, from what I've been told, and it's difficult to find food and water. We're still under a boil water notice. Of course, those houses maybe that are in a more impoverished part of town have had ruptured pipes and have had no water. They've had no electricity. Water may have frozen on the floor of the homes during that time. So it's been quite difficult. And I know people up where you are must be, just shocked by this, but we don't have insulation in our houses or on our pipes because it's always hot here. We tolerate 105-degree temperatures. This to us is a terrible shock.
Well, and the infrastructure wasn't prepared for it. The ERCOT, as she mentions, that regulatory agency that Texas has, and their electric grid is not insulated. It's not prepared. A lot of these facilities are exposed to the outdoors, believe it or not. They're not even enclosed. And natural gas couldn't even be dispensed properly. Well, I'm going to put up on the screen this mutual aid .org. Mutual aid is a great place for people to donate and help out because there's going to be a big need down there. I mean, this is just beginning from that perspective, folks. As Michelle mentioned, there's going to be a lot of cleanup and a lot of repair that's necessary by people that just don't have the means to do it. So there's a lot of places you can go to donate and assist. Again, I would like the government to do more of this. It's great that individuals have the ability to do it, but for me, this is why we have a government, is to step in and be able to do those. Maybe Joe Biden will get down there. Beto O'Rourke, as she mentioned, and AOC down there pitching in. That's admirable. Normally, I would say, it's kind of PR, it's kind of optics, but I'm telling you, in a situation like the one that she's in, people down there need that type of thing. You need that reassurance that the government is on top of this, that help is on the way, that everybody's going to be able to help one another and get through this. It reminds me of my Woodstock days and Wavy Gravy talking to the Woodstock audience. There's always a little bit of heaven in every disaster area.
Good morning. What we have in mind is breakfast in bed for 400,000. Now, it's not going to be steak and eggs or anything, but it's going to be good food, and we're going to get it to you. It's not just the hog farm either. It's like the Ojai Mountain family and the pranksters and everybody else that has volunteered and put in their time into the free kitchens. In fact, it's everybody. We're all feeding each other. We must be in heaven, man. There is always a little bit of heaven in a disaster area.
Well, Michelle, I really appreciate you coming on Podcast by George to give us your story. Your mom's okay. You're okay. Anything here you'd like to say in closing as we wrap up?
Yeah, I know you mentioned the president coming down, and I would really like Joe Biden to stay where he is and get done with this pandemic. That's the need we've been dealing with for a year, the pandemic and the economy. I am happy that our local Texas politicians have come forward, like Beto O'Rourke and AOC came down, because this is going to last for months, but it's not like the fixing of the pandemic, which is what we really need now. And it hasn't been done in the previous administration. Nothing was done. And so we really need to have a leader in charge of keeping things calm, keeping the focus on the pandemic and the economy right now. We'll get through this. Texas gets through things, and we'll help each other, and we have been. So we'll make it forward from here.
Well, that's great. That's a great way to wrap up. And you can't overstate the significance of the pandemic. And there will be some effect to that, because when you're scratching to survive, when you're searching for food and water, sometimes you don't take the proper precautions. Sometimes the protocol isn't there. Sometimes masks don't get worn. You want to stay home if you possibly can, but if you got to go out and forage, folks, like some of these people have had to do, that all goes by the wayside. So those are thoughts and words well taken. Michelle, thanks again. Thanks for giving us your insight, your personal account down there in Austin today on Podcast by George.
Thank you so much for having me.
Folks, I hope you appreciate this. I hope you like the stories on Podcast by George. If you do, it's easy to follow us on Facebook. And, of course, you can subscribe on YouTube. Ring the notification bell there. Twitter, Podcast by George is the hashtag. That's where you can go to find us there. And, of course, we're also in audio on iTunes and Spotify and the iHeartRadio app and every place that audio podcasts are heard. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up for today, folks. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.